So yeah, good morning and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Billy Huban Thompson, a lead researcher here at Demos. I'm delighted to be chairing this panel discussion about how we can achieve the. Oh, it's good. Always good to hear your own voice at the start as well. About how we can achieve the ambitions of the National Plan for Music Education, based on new Demos research commissioned by MusicMark. Um, I was saying to a few of you beforehand, music education is a very personal subject for me, as I'm sure it is for many people in this room. Growing up, my mum taught and led music at a primary school, funnily enough, in Bambos's constituency. And early each morning, she'd head down the road, armed with an IKEA bag full of instruments and sheet music and a big mug of tea, determined to ensure that all pupils at that school would have the opportunity to experience the joy and wonder that music can bring. And so they did. Classroom music lessons, a school orchestra, a choir, year group music trips. I could go on. And the pupils in that school, hailing from a range of backgrounds, were all able to access the great benefits that we all know that music can bring, allowing pupils to engage with other places, perspectives, and periods of time, giving them opportunities to express themselves, to learn the value of dedication and practice, and to access those special experiences that can bring communities together. And across the country, music hub leaders, music teachers, peri teachers, music services, voluntary and community sector organizations, and others are working tirelessly to give all pupils a brilliant music education. Music enriches us spiritually, culturally, socially, but also economically. In 2023, music contributed a record 7.6 billion to the UK economy, with the industry supporting 216,000 jobs. So, for a government interested in both tackling barriers to opportunity and driving economic growth, improving music education opportunities across the country should be a key priority, as well as music, of course, just being a wonderful end in itself. Um, Music education in England, as we know, is currently underpinned by the National Plan for Music Education, and at the heart of that plan sits these music hubs, which support, deliver, and enable access to music education for children and young people within local areas. The policy was introduced in 2011, but then was refreshed in 2022. And following this kind of refresh, music hubs now have to meet even greater demands, such as a wider age range and new aims around progress into music careers. More recently, the previous government introduced plans to reduce the number of music hub partnerships from 116 to 43, with hub leaders having to navigate this transition. So, in this period of significant change and enhanced ambitions, Music Hub's funding through the revenue grant has remained static at 76.1 million since 2019. Hubs are now being asked to achieve more with less. And in this context, MusicMark commissioned Demos to better understand the current challenges that music hubs are facing and estimate what it would cost to deliver the refreshed NPME. Drawing on original survey data from music leaders, Arts Council, England data, and workshops with those working to deliver the refreshed NPME, our report accounts for new and hidden costs associated with the plan. It identifies potential barriers to delivery and, crucially, calculates an estimate of the funding needed to deliver the plan effectively. So through our work, we identify a wealth of delivery challenges associated with NPME2, including instrument procurement costs, fundraising costs, and the costs associated with the transition to 43 HLOs. However, the key cost that cuts across kind of all of this is staffing. We heard from music hub partnerships struggling to recruit, develop, support, and fairly compensate their workforce, with concerns about staff having to go above and beyond to compensate for a lack of funding and resources in the system. We also heard about the importance of geographical context, the capacity of local schools, the quality of public transport options, the availability of appropriate venues, and other factors that affect delivery in different parts of the country. Overall, we estimate that by 2028-29, music hub partnerships will require a further 32.3 million in funding per year to cover the additional costs associated with NPME2. We argue that the government should make up this difference and that the whole of the revenue grant should be index linked to protect music hubs from the sorts of real terms cuts that they've experienced in recent years. Alongside this, we make 4 further recommendations, including liberating hubs from restrictive funding and reporting constraints, restoring the essential place of music education in schools, mobilizing support from the wider music sector and industry, and rejuvenating so-called cultural deserts through strong local investment. In the report, we've tried to both capture the policy context and profile the voices of the professionals who are working hard to deliver the NPME on a daily basis. And with that in mind, I'm delighted to be joined by a brilliant panel of experts from the worlds of both policy and practice to discuss the findings of our report and what it would look like to achieve the ambitions of NPME2. So I'd like to introduce Anna Sabine, who is the Liberal Democrat MP for Freeman and East Somerset and Vice Chair of the APPG for Music Education. Bambos Charalambos, who is the Labour MP for the newly established seat of Southgate and Wood Green and also chairs the APPG for Music Education. Bridget White, who is the CEO of Music Mark, a membership organisation, subject association, and an Arts Council England investment principal support organisation advocating for excellent musical learning in and out of school. Janetta Hurst, who is a music specialist, flautist, consultant, and school leader with 19 years of experience leading secondary music in a range of settings. Janetta runs the Creative Educator Consultancy. And Charlotte Payne. Charlotte is head of the music services at Inspiring Music in Central Bedfordshire Council, the hub lead organisation for the BLMK Music Hub. Those initialisms always catch me out. I mean, I can only apologise. So yeah, just to kick us off, I think that's quite enough from me. It would be great to just hear some opening reflections, both about the kind of the report itself, but what we can do to ensure a brilliant music education for all young people. So please do use the mic, even though you won't hear yourself being amplified, for the benefit of those being online. So maybe Anna, if I started with you for some opening thoughts.
You started with the least expert person in the room, because although it's a subject I'm very passionate about, I can't claim to be an expert in it at all. And my interest in it came from being the kid at a comprehensive state school who got into her music education journey when her clarinet teacher, peripatetic clarinet teacher, found a plastic bassoon in a cupboard and decided that as I had big hands and seemed to be vaguely capable at music, I should be the school bassoonist. And that took me on an amazing music education journey, for which I'll always be really grateful, and which I'm really sad that kids these days don't have the opportunity to do. I think if I could kind of make one political point today, because I obviously come at it from a political point of view, I'm constantly dispirited by the way in which we see STEM and STEM subjects as the absolute kind of be all and end all of what education should be delivering, and how if we can just crack STEM, we've somehow cracked growth in this country and cracked everything a forward thinking country needs to be. And I think the role of politicians and people like me and Bambos is probably to just try and bang the drum for music and the arts more widely in politics, and for the importance of that, not just because it's important to our souls and our spirits, but because it's important in terms of growth as well. There's loads of ways in which we know economic growth can be achieved through the arts, and so I'm just really passionate about using my voice to try and raise up the kind of arts and music in the political sphere, I guess.
Thank you. I'm Bambos. I'm the chair of the APPG, and while there is politics, Anna and I are one on this, and it is something we both care about deeply. The government made it part of the Labour government made it part of the manifesto commitment to look at more creative subjects. There is the curriculum review, which I'm sure from all the hints that we've been given, that creative subjects will be part of the curriculum when that's announced. That will also require some additional funding, but we are just about to embark on a comprehensive spending review. So we need to make sure that we argue our corner, because things can't stay as they are, because as Billy said, there are additional costs that will be attached to this. But it's not just seeing music education just in isolation, because many local authorities are responsible for having their music service delivering what the hubs do. So it's also about funding local authorities and seeing what the ecosystem's like elsewhere. So it's about recruiting more teachers, having more specialist teachers. That means more music subjects available for music teachers to develop their education. It's also about making sure that students are taking A-level music. So it's about encouraging that to happen as well in schools. So there's a much wider picture that we need to pick up on, and make sure that that happens. The music hubs also face huge challenges because, having been reduced to the number they are now, some may face big geographical challenges. And without the additional funding available, it's much harder in places like Kent and Medway to get around such a huge area to make sure that the hubs are delivering on the quality of music education that we want to see. So there are lots of challenges. It's not just about education. It's not just about funding for education. There are wider issues, and that's something that we need to be wary of.
Okay, hopefully that didn't make too much noise picking it up. Yeah, so obviously I would say that music is the most important subject, and I would talk about it needs proper funding, and I've been saying that for many, many years. What's great about this report is it's an independent report by an independent organisation, and saying what we've been saying for a long time, but giving it more detail, more heft, I think, to argue our case. music is important for every child already. Music is in them, but we need to support them to develop their musical skills, whether that's to become a professional musician, to go into the music industry in another role like a CEO of a membership organization, or to become a politician or the prime minister, or go and work in the National Health Service. Music can support so many things that we cannot deny children and young people the opportunity to expand their musical knowledge and expertise, to become their best selves. And we're very excited by the Labour Party's manifesto and its commitment to children and young people of this country. The statements such as break down barriers to opportunities to make sure that there's no class ceiling on the ambitions of children and young people. Well, there is a class ceiling in music. It's becoming more and more apparent. In the last 5 years, parents have contributed more to music education than any other funding stream. And we're seeing a reduction in the number of children and young people taking individual, small group, or large group tuition. And that's because parents can't afford it. The reality is, we've got to find a way of making it possible for remissions policies to have the right amount of money in them for all children and young people to be able to access music education, regardless of where they live, regardless of their state, the family situation.
Thank you, Bridget. So in terms of my opening thoughts, which is what you asked for, Demos has excellently captured the experiences of schools and hubs, accurately reflecting the range of experiences of stakeholders dependent often upon the locality, which we've heard, the type and size of the school, and socio-economic demographic background of the young people accessing those services. So I previously, in I think around October of 2022, wrote an article for Music Teacher magazine on the NPME2, expressing my feelings and thoughts were an overall hope, actually, and anticipation for the positive impact of the plan. I personally think the plan is great. As we were discussing earlier this morning, there are some challenges in making it equitable for everybody. Student access to Key Stage 4 music being one of the things that we've heard here and that is so inconsistent. It's just one area. There are many things that will come up through this panel discussion, but just in terms of the squeeze on the EBAC, the squeeze of the practical subjects, and just thinking about the impact that's had over recent years has completely changed the landscape. We've had to retrain teachers to think about what they're doing at Key Stage 3. So we've got those children opting at Key Stage 4, etc., etc. So we've had to rethink things. I think the plan is fantastic, it's ambitious. I'm fully behind it. We've just got to make sure that it's equitable for everyone. In terms of hubs, I do sit on up until November, we wrapped up the strategy board at Lambeth Sounds, but for the 4 years before that, I was sitting on the strategy board at Lambeth Sounds. And thinking about hubs then, I think the report makes for sober reading, with the research uncovering the hidden costs of the national plan. And I think when I wrote that article in 2022, it just felt fantastic. I wasn't thinking about the hidden costs so much. I think it's really good that this report has happened to let us unpick and uncover what else we need to think about, and what actually we've seen even in real time in that transition from the 100 and whatever it was hubs to the 43. There's a lot that's happened. There's been a lot of time that's had to be put into thinking about that transition process. The practical aims and the vision of the national plan and the model music curriculum, which came just before it as well, we need to think about that document as well. As I've said, I think they're wonderful. I'm in agreement with the aims of the guidance documents. I just think that without any sort of statutory requirement, which is written into this report, for schools to work alongside hubs, which is so variable across the country, the extent to which schools and hubs interact. And it's part of the third recommendation in the report. Implementation of the plan is going to vary significantly across hubs and schools, and in many cases, unfortunately, it's likely to be limited, the engagement with that, because it doesn't have to be done. There are lots of priorities in schools, and so it would be really good to have some statutory requirement for schools to reach out with hubs and vice versa, because there's a great offer out there. And I was talking to somebody before about how much I believe in partnership work. It's at the heart of those kids that go on to be the Young Musician of the Year, those children that go on to conservatoires and university, and those that then go on to become teachers like I did.
Thanks, Janetta. My name's Charlotte Payne. I'm from Inspiring Music, which is in central Bedfordshire, and we are the hub lead organisation for the Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes, so BLMK Music Hub. And I'm going to bring my perspective as that from that role here. We're very different in the area that we're in. So we have got rurality, where I am in central Bedfordshire, where we haven't got very good public transport. And then we have Luton, which is almost another London borough. So it's very, very different demographically, and we're having to manage that. But just to reflect what Janetta said about the new national plan, the 22 version, we were all very welcoming of this, and it's just about how it's going to come into fruition. The CPD for schools, great. We work really closely with those partners, our key partners. We can't reach all of the people in the schools that we work in because there's too many children, and we are one thing. So to work with schools is fabulous. To work with partners to grow that network of partners is brilliant. But all of this costs money. All of this is how are we going to fund all of this? And working with fantastic industry like Bath Phil we have here today, to have that infrastructure, we need more money to do so. And I'm seeing kind of a bit of a bleak situation where I'm seeing different service areas across the country having to make really bizarre sacrifices in order to make ends meet. The books are just almost impossible to balance, to try to get back to zero every time. And with the inflation of staff costs, inflation of resources, venue hire, whenever we run a CPD session for speakers, the speakers' costs go up each time because their travel costs have gone up and their costs have gone up, and we're having to constantly absorb this. And there's only so much water you can put into a cup and it overflows, and we are getting beyond that. And I feel which is reflected in the report, and I was really pleased with the reflections that it's what I see day to day. And it's how can we keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing? There's got to be a point where there's just literally no water left in that sponge is dry. And with people having to give up annual leave to go with the paperwork, one of the recommendations being about reporting. And I think I welcome those recommendations with leveraging funding, with liberating and rejuvenating, especially areas that are this climate, the cultural desert. And I think it's really important that we take this moment, take this report, use it really wisely. We are in this position now to actually try and influence some change. It's needed because what's the worst thing that we can't have no music in life. It's great that we have music for music's sake. Music also brings all those wonderful transferable skills, problem solving, non-verbal communication, all the things that help our children grow, and that's fabulous. Also, it brings in loads of money for the country, the economy. Why would we ignore that? If we nurture it, we're nurturing all the different levels, and I think that's just so important. Anyway, I've probably spoken a bit longer than I should have, so apologies.
Not at all. Thanks everyone for your really thoughtful reflections. I just wanted to pick up on your point, Bridget, around, and in fact, no, sorry, it wasn't Bridget, but it was this point around Janetta, you were talking about the statutory obligation, perhaps, and what that might look like. And I'm obviously just thinking about some of the challenges that schools have in terms of prioritizing music in the context, say, of the English Baccalaureate, which doesn't include music within its measure. Could you speak a little bit more about what would it take for schools to be in a better position, to feel sort of empowered and in a better position to engage with music hubs more fully?
Yeah, absolutely. Not to be missed is the fact that Bambos said that there is this planned funding, and there is this planned in the curriculum review inclusion of the arts subject. So that is very exciting, and that's exactly what we need to tilt the balance back in the right direction, because we've all been climbing uphill for a number of years. To answer your question on what we would need and what it would need to look like, I think that I've worked in so many different contexts, from single person department right at the start of my career to music specialism in my most recent school, to high levels of socioeconomic deprivation, to single gender schools, so many different types of schools, independent sector briefly. And I think what it needs to look like is not anything that is going to take away autonomy. We are creative people. So music teachers up and down the country will tell you they're doing what they're doing because that works for the children that they're working with, and it speaks to maybe their interests and it speaks to the interests of the wider community. So we need to not remove that part. We need to keep the autonomy there, but what we need is to know what the offer is. I think there are probably too many schools that don't actually know what's on offer from their music hub. And so there's something around, you need to engage. There's an expectation for you to engage on whatever level it is. Maybe it's tiered, but I wrote this in 2022. At the very least, for music hubs to be making very, very clear to all schools, including our primary schools as well. I'm not only talking secondaries, but our primary schools. This is what the offer is, and then the hubs need the funding to have the time to get into schools. When I first started teaching 19 years ago, you could meet with, back then, your subject advisor. They went shortly after that, and there was great support from the subject advisor. And now, if it's your hub lead or your head of whoever, your learning and participation person, whoever it is, that you need to have that person come and sit down in your school and come and see what's going on in your context. I don't think that really tends to happen. I am the kind of person, you can probably get the sense, I go knocking on doors. Okay, I will knock on doors until I get where I need to get for the young people. And I think not everybody has that mindset, not everybody has that capacity. I've had great head teachers. I put myself in schools where I can see there's a passion for the arts. For the teachers that don't necessarily have that, and they don't have that agency, and they can't get to the senior leadership team, and they don't know what they should be asking for because maybe they're an early career teacher. There's such a variation, but we just need, from the hub side, support for the hubs to facilitate those conversations with the leaders of music in schools. And where there's a deficit of a leader, that's another question which maybe we'll come to later, but we need to also support and make sure that the plan does suggest there should be a leader of music identified in each school. I'll stop there because there are several of us to speak, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks so much. I was wondering if Charlotte or Bridget, would either of you like to come in on that at all?
Just very briefly, it's interesting you're talking about the school music hub partnership relationship, and I think that is really important. And the curriculum and assessment review is a really positive step in the right direction. The other, obviously, Labour commitment with Labour, the arts and music will no longer be the preserve of the privileged few, and making sure it's at the heart of the curriculum is a really big step of that. But what's interesting, actually, and it's a slight elephant in the room that we haven't actually mentioned, is that the National Plan for Music Education is the previous government's policy, and whilst we continue to deliver elements of it, some of it is no longer part of this current government's policy. But does that not give us the opportunity to look again at the national plan alongside the new curriculum and assessment review when it's finished, and align the two much more closely, align the work more closely, as they did in Wales? So the Welsh National Plan for Music Education, which was published a month before the English one, was published at the same time as a new curriculum was about to start to be delivered in schools in Wales. And that alignment of the two has made a huge difference to the relationship between music services in Wales and the National Music Service for Wales and the schools, and that alignment also ensured there were instruments and resources in schools. The other thing to just touch on is the National Music Education Network, and this is an idea that's has been suggested as part of the Labour manifesto, and the idea of a network that supports music education across the nation. I think we have it. I think our national network is the 43 music education hubs, but they're very early stages, and we need to give them the time, but we also need to give them the resource to do the work that they could do. Charlotte, do you want to talk about that? Thank you.
It is also, worth noting that, in the report it points out that 42% of state schools are not putting their students forward for music GCSE, and it might be that music GCSE isn't the right subject for 2024-25 moving forward cohort, but we need to be able to put the support and provision in place for the students that GCSE music isn't, and we've got to make sure that we're not losing, it's not trickling through and it's slipping through the cracks. As I said earlier in the opening speech, that we can't, as music hubs, reach every single child because there's too many, but we can work with our schools to do that. And it's about building those really important relationships with the schools. And go back to what Janetta said, we need those people banging on the doors, but some, especially in primary schools who might not be specialists, we need to hold their hands and be able to make sure that they feel confident in being delivering their part of the National Plan for Music. It's a partnership. It's not us delivering it. It's all of us as a community. And we are absolutely in a place to be able to support, but we need the kind of nudge from saying, okay, well, music is important. Actually, we need you to be doing it in schools, because once it's gone, it's too late. And like I said, it's not just about the qualifications; it's about the infrastructure. It's about the person, the people that are accessing music for music's sake as well.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. As has sort of been mentioned, changes really afoot on the curriculum assessment front with the review currently underway, and we're expecting a sort of an interim report fairly soon. Bambos, do you think that does present an opportunity, as Bridget says, to maybe think about the plan more fundamentally, for Labour to put a stamp on what it thinks a kind of a liberated approach to a kind of a music education for everyone would look like? And do you have any kind of initial thoughts yourself on what that might look like?
Well, I think it'd be an opportunity, but obviously, if the National Plan for Music Education has got lots of good stuff in it, I think it's important that we keep the good stuff in it, and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. So yes, it'd be great if they were more closely aligned, but we need to wait and see what the curriculum review says, and how that's and if there are differences, what those differences represent. But I think you have seen a change in what the government are planning, because they've said it quite clearly. So Keir Starmer was asked a question at PMQs, and he said there would be more support for creative subjects. Bridget Phillipson said that, and DCMS have said that as well. So I think we can see the flavour of what's coming. I cast my mind back to those heady days in 1997 with the Blair government, and you had the Pat 10 review, which was led by Ken Robinson, and that gave a flavour as to what Labour should have done. They didn't take that opportunity, unfortunately, because I think David Blunkett didn't sort of think that was the right way to go. So we need to make sure that we do argue the case, and that missed opportunity doesn't repeat itself here. So let's see what happens next. But I think it would be an opportunity to look at the National Plan for Music, but not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as I said.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the other kind of, I guess, elephant in the room is that a lot of what's coming from the Labour government on this is brilliant, and I love the kind of recommitment to the arts and stuff, but there's also no money. And I think we're seeing across all different sectors there's no money. And so, and I think we saw last week the National Youth Music Organisations having their funding cut, which was, I was in my county youth orchestra, and a lot of kids from that orchestra would have gone on to those organisations. And so that's a really worrying trend. And you mentioned in your report, I think, that at the last Labour conference, Lisa Nandy had said, it's all so terrible that arts organisations are the first thing to be cut when there's a problem, and then they cut the NYMO funding. So I think there's a worry that a lot of this talk is brilliant, but I'm presuming for you guys, if there isn't money to go with it, that's going to be tricky. It's extra tasks without any funding. And related to that, I guess I wanted to say, as a new MP, I've realised that MPs are very simple creatures, and we respond to kind of what's in our inboxes. And I am not lobbied on this issue by anybody. I don't get spoken to by organisations about it. I don't get spoken to by parents about it. I'm largely here because I have one very active constituent, the music director of Bathville, who lives in my constituency, who's all over this. But other than that, I don't hear about it. And I would just really, really encourage you to make sure that your MPs know that you're there, that they come and see your music hubs, that you get parents emailing in on your behalf, because that's actually the strongest way for us to push this up our agenda, is for you guys to make a lot of noise with us about why we should be supporting you. I suspect the average MP doesn't know much about their music hub, or certainly the challenges that you're facing.
Thanks very much. And so back in September of last year, the Lib Dems put out their kind of music education piece of what a sort of Lib Dem music policy would look like, including an arts pupil premium, I think free instrumental lessons. What is the kind of the current thinking of, what a kind of Lib Dem slant or reform of an NPME sort of might look like, or at least what are the kind of the questions that you're asking yourself at the moment about that kind of policy area?
Well, you beautifully set out our policy area, which was to have an arts pupil premium and to have free music lessons for kids in primary schools. But I'm sure what Bambos might say is we have the privilege of being in opposition and not having to pay for any of it. So we certainly had that ambition, and we certainly set out, we had to have a costed manifesto and how we would pay for everything, just to be really clear. But I think, I don't envy the current government and the situation it's inherited. I was in a meeting with Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, about special educational needs kids, and it was really clear that they have an ambition to totally reform how we do SEND in this country, but it was going to be really unclear how any of that was going to be paid for. And I think that's the challenge the government faces. We can all have great kind of ambitions, but it's how we pay for it. And I guess it's on Bambos and his colleagues to try and lobby the relevant people to make sure that there's some money put aside for this. And certainly the trends in terms of what's coming out, decisions that are being made at the moment, it doesn't look very promising to me that arts is going to be high up the list. I think if you're the Labour government, you're not too worried about making noise about funding arts at the moment. There's other things like the NHS or whatever that you want to be seen to be funding ahead of that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, Anna's absolutely right. Money will be tight. My only hope is that the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Darren Jones, is a saxophonist, or he does play the saxophone. So I'll use that to sort of press a few buttons for him. But also we need to make sure we have specialists in our schools as well. I'm a governor at one school where the head teacher, she teaches I think year 4 or 5 music one week and then French the other week, and she's not a specialist and she's just trying to get by. And obviously she would welcome support from the music hub, so I've directed her to the music hub, and hopefully that will see support. But that's not uncommon in many schools where music is taught by people who are not specialists in music, and that needs to change as well.
Thanks very much. I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of the transition from a system of over 100 music hubs to now, I think, 43. And we're talking a lot about kind of potential areas for reform and how the NPME might change and Labour's stamp or the Lib Dems, stamp were they to find themselves in government. But I'm also thinking about, from a sort of a music education professional's perspective, presumably there are a lot of concerns about, oh goodness, they're going to change the whole thing again, and all of the costs associated with that. And we were speaking, Charlotte, beforehand about some of the costs associated with transitioning into this system of fewer kind of hub lead organizations. I was just wondering if you could kind of share your reflections on what that transition was like, and maybe any kind of warnings or considerations for a future sort of government intervention in this area at all.
Absolutely, thank you. So we were talking about it earlier, and I think the whole country had a different mix. Some areas were left completely alone, weren't joined up with people, and others were put together with other geographical areas. Some were very, very welcome, and some have a little bit of a tricky road ahead of them. Ours was very, very happy because we were Bedfordshire. We had already disaggregated 12 years before, and we'd already been trying to stitch it back together from the inside out. So it was really good, and with the addition of Milton Keynes as well, it's been really positive journey, and we're very, very happy to be working together to hopefully streamline and make sure that we can get more opportunities happening with children and young people. However, we have 4 very small music services: Luton, Bedford, Central Bedfordshire and Milton Keynes. And we needed to officially come together, and we had to create legal documentation for that, for the agreements, partnership agreements, data sharing agreements, a joint controller, all of the different things, and costing out obviously the time for meeting to talk about all of this stuff. And I costed that out from September 23 to September 24, and it cost together £82,000. And that's about £20,000 per area. That's £20,000 that's not reaching the children and young people. That, as we talked about earlier, is possibly a salary and a half of a person. That could, it's a significant amount of money. And that the hope is that eventually, with this obviously isn't an annual thing, but that hasn't been funded. We've had to find that money under rocks, looking under our sofa cushions. It's just not there, and we're having to be very careful about how we approach the rest of the financial year, so that we don't become a pressure elsewhere, because we don't necessarily have reserves, because we've all still recovering from COVID, and the provision hasn't quite got back to where it was before COVID either, and we're seeing that nationally as well. So it's a lot of money that wasn't funded, and we're already on the back foot. but saying that moving forward, we're hoping that won't be the case. But I just can't understand that, with such a major national reorganisation, there wasn't any money put aside for it, or if there was, where did it go? Because we haven't seen it at all, and we're suffering for it. And like I said, the sacrifices people are having to make to come nearer to zero by the end of the financial year by not re-recruiting, putting pressure on other colleagues in their services. So they're just constantly having to, beg, borrow and steal to make ends meet, and that's not good enough. So like I said, the 5 recommendations, if there are ways forward that we can move in that way, that would be really, really helpful. I don't know if Bridget, you wanted to add on to that one. No?
Can you just repeat the question for me?
It was just around the transition to hubs and the cost associated with that, and any kind of warning to sort of policymakers or considerations they should have if they were to make reforms to the system, and the kind of the costs associated with that change.
Again, something that Bambos said, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The report, the report as it stands, not the report that Demos have written, but the national plan, should I say, is a good document. And there was consultation with very knowledgeable people to pull that together. I don't really have any bias so long as it's good for the children. Okay. I think we take what's there, what teachers and hub leaders and music education staff do not need is to have to go back and rethink everything again. So that is not going to be advantageous. There's no time anyway, so let's not waste more time. We're in the business of supporting young people. That's what we want to spend our time. The big cost, which you've really kind of spoken to already, is the staffing cost. And I always think about staff and staff being happy and feeling supported. And I think that even within hubs, I think unfortunately you spoke to this as well. You have more insight than me, but I am aware of those costs in staffing that had to happen to manage this process financially. And we don't want great people, even we haven't got enough great people in the first place. And we need to keep our highly skilled, highly trained, highly qualified musicians in our hubs and supporting our children in schools. So that's all I would add to that.
Lovely, thanks very much. We're about to open it up to the floor and to those online, so get your questions ready. I just wanted to quickly ask another question around the kind of the income generation question. And we've had this, okay, the rhetoric is great from Labour, but where's the money coming from? And I guess part of the answer, unfortunately, at the moment is it's coming from parents and from schools, and on the obligation that hubs have to do a whole lot of income generation outside of the revenue grant. Bridget, I was just wondering if you could tell me kind of what are the consequences of that arrangement, what are the challenges that hubs are facing, and what a way forward might be?
Well, the main consequence is that there isn't lots more money out there to bring in. One of the consequences I've already talked about is if you have to raise the charges to parents, fewer parents can afford it. And we know from figures that the Arts Council's data set that there are fewer pupils taking one-to-one small group and large group lessons. And that's got to be because parents can't afford it. Becomes that the preserve of the privileged few, which isn't good. I don't think we can realistically, with over 9.1 million children in state education between the ages of 5 and 16, go down the route of free instrumental tuition for all children and young people in England, as they have in Scotland. It's producing its own challenges in Scotland, that policy, but we need to be able to ensure that no child is left behind. So we need a realistic amount of funding for revisions policies. But the other fundraising, the chapter talks about fundraising, but some of it's income generation, and the income generation parents and schools. But there's also trying to find money from trusts and foundations. But that is challenging, and you've identified that in the report. And there is less money out there for that. More calls on it. Youth Music, the National Foundation for Youth Music, distributes lottery funding. They can only fund 17% of those who apply to them for funding. So there are a lot of organisations out there who are trying to find this funding to support it. Local authority support has dwindled in the last 10, 15, 20 years. In Scotland, local authorities still invest in music education. And then we've got devolution coming, and I'm not quite sure what that's going to mean for music education and the support from local authority, upper tier local authority areas. And then so that the other pots of funding are diminishing, and the only one that seems to be going up is parents' contributions, which is in a time of a financial crisis, a time of more expense, VAT on private schools, increased national insurance contributions. All these things are having an impact on our population and on the ability to be able to afford this music education. And what I love about this report is your clear statement that if government can invest in the core, in the core delivery, and then the fundraising, the funding that's found can be the innovative additional work that complements that core offer that every child should have the opportunity to learn a musical instrument, to sing, create music, perform, and listen to performance. If we could let every child have that opportunity, we might not want it, but we need to have every child have that opportunity, and then we can develop those amazing projects with the other fundraising.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's far too important to be left to chance in the way that it is at the moment. So I'm going to open it up to questions in just a second. Any opportunities for any kind of reflections on what's been said before we open it up? Yeah.
I just want to make a nakedly political point that I don't think there is less money out there. The successive governments have made tax and spending decisions that mean the money isn't where we might want it to be. There's plenty of money. Roman Abramovich owns the Treasury about £1 billion in tax or something. I think there's money out there. This is why we need to be lobbying government to try and get them to make the kind of decisions that would support organisations like you guys.
Thanks very much. Okay. I'm going to open up to the floor now. If you just maybe raise your hand, and we'll take maybe two or three at a time, I reckon. Maybe. Yes, gentleman over there, and then just at the back. Did you have a question as well? Anyone else? Okay, we'll take those two. Take those two for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Peter Smalley, Chief Executive, Northamptonshire Music and Performing Arts Trust, which is the hub lead organisation for Northamptonshire and Rutland. And also I'm Chair of Music Mark. And I'd just like to say that all of the MPs in Northamptonshire know all about us. Thank you to all of the panel for your comments. It's really positive to hear what you've got to say. As a hub leader, I particularly want to endorse all of the comments made by Charlotte. I recognise them all. And reading the document, it was really heartening to think that possibly for the first time, somebody really understood the scale of the problem. But I suppose I want to make a point first, and then I'll get to my question. The point is that in the document, it talks about what we're going to need over the next 5 years in order to match inflation and meet the expectations of the new plan. It doesn't address the fact that the core funding for music education is essentially the same now as it was in 2011. In fact, since the introduction of hubs, it's risen by 1.4%. But this morning, the Bank of England inflation calculator tells me that inflation has run by 41%. There is no surprise whatsoever that we as hub leaders are struggling to do more than we were expected in 2012 in those economic circumstances. And the reality of where we are, me having spent a professional lifetime planning, organizing, delivering educational programs for children and young people, now spend my time wondering what I'm going to cut next, because we just cannot balance the budget. Our organization generates 400% more income in traded services than we get in the core grant, but the core grant is needed to underpin everything else. Last year, I did something I thought I would never do. I took my staff out of the professional pension scheme that they deserve to be in. We gave them a whopping 2.2% pay award when the pay award for the teaching sector was above that. And the morale amongst my staff is not good. And that goes for the whole country. My story will be replicated 43 times. And in all of the constituent organizations that make up those hubs. Unless something changes soon, there's going to be a dramatic loss in the capacity to ever deliver proper music education for all children and young people in the future. So my question is, what can we do about it?
Thanks very much. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind just passing the microphone to the gentleman just behind. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Jason Thornton. I'm the music director of Bath Philharmonia, but I was a teacher once, and I'm also a trained music leader. My question is, I think, first of all, I think the report is excellent and a real new breath of fresh air, which is terrific. I think the plan is excellent too. I think there are structural things that underpin it that are just currently not there. And I think the acknowledgement of the financial situation is absolutely apparent. I think it's been mentioned by the panel, but I think the issues with regarding to statutory provision is absolutely crucial. Without statutory provision, it's always going to be on the sideline. And that brings me on to my question of something that I don't think that we've raised, and I'm not sure it's the place to raise it. But in my experience, I teach, I do a lot of training for primary school teachers and also secondary school teachers in creative music delivery. And what I'm noticing is a couple of things. Firstly, in primary delivery, young teachers at the start of their primary school journeys are receiving currently 1 hour of delivery, of training and delivery from music education. That's not 1 hour a week, that's 1 hour for their entire PGCE in primary delivery at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So I'm not surprised that we've got issues with music delivery in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And I'm hearing from colleagues a huge problem with recruitment for new music teachers at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. So we've got a problem with workforce training, and we've got a problem with workforce retention as well. And that, alongside the statutory issues, I think are the key and primary issues with regard to music education in this country going forward, because otherwise we're going to have nobody to do it. With all the best will in the world, the hubs can't teach every single child in every single primary school class. So my question is, what we're going to do?
Great. Two really interesting reflections, both of which ended in a similar question of, okay, what's the next step? What can we do about this? So if you know, a few things there. Maybe taking that second question first and talking about the emphasis on music education within initial teacher training and the importance of that, and it kind of touched also on the importance of statutory provision. Bridget, did you want to come in on any of those points?
So we welcomed, I know that there was a lot of advocacy and lobbying that went on, and we welcomed the return of the £10,000 handshake to train to be a music teacher. It's still a lot less than some other subjects, and that's a real shame. But at least it was reinstated a few years ago, and perhaps that might help us to find some of our secondary school music teachers. Although we're never reaching the target to train enough teachers for secondary school, and it results in the French teacher teaching music as well. We also, in primary, as you pointed out, the 1 hour to do in a PGCE is really worrying, and I wonder whether that will shift when the curriculum and assessment review is complete, and there is a new curriculum which has more of an emphasis on the creative subjects and music, and that perhaps PGCE courses will recognise the value of training. I spoke to a music service leader who was also a hub leader, and they said, I've been in contact with my local university and offered to come in and train the PGCE students in music education, and they didn't want me to come and help. And that's really worrying, that these institutions don't want the help that's there. But I think it's not just about initial teacher training, it's also about in-service training and how we support our teachers and encourage them and take away the fear. And one of the things I used to say very flippantly was the music department at a secondary school is probably the largest department in the school for teachers. And I'd get these looks from the music teacher who was a one teacher department, and I'd say, what about all your Perrys that are coming in? What about all the other musicians who are coming into the school to support musical learning more broadly? And there was a great article in the Classical Music magazine, Music Teacher magazine, from Simon Toyne, who's ex-president of the Music Teachers Association, talking about the role of musicians in school and how they can support the music teacher and give them the encouragement that they need as a music teacher, but also complement and expand the music education in that school. And I think that can be taken down into primary as well. We know Feversham Primary, the head of the school there, the head of music there, brings in community musicians to work with him and to work with the school. So I think it's about that relationship that just needs money. So I think there are ways we could do it if we had the resource to do it, and you want to do it.
Thank you.
Absolutely do. And I think, echoing what Jason's just said about the shortage of teachers in secondary schools in particular, it is. And it's going to take a while then for this to come through. So, great that there's some funding. Not great that it's not the same as some of the other subjects, as Bridget just said. But equally, we run a programme in Central Bedfordshire where we call it Teach Together. So it's taking non-specialist primary teachers to train them up to deliver music curriculum in their school. And we do get some success, but we don't get a huge lot of buy-in. When we do it, we get great feedback saying, "Well, brilliant, I know what to do now, I can do this." But because it's not statutory, because it's not got a box next to it that needs to have a tick, the head teachers don't support it. So we need that nudge, and we need that endorsement to kind of say, yes, music is important, let's make it statutory. And then we've got a leg to stand on, because at the moment we're banging on doors and we might not be getting an answer, and we're very willing, and it's a model that would be really successful to help us reach the children and young people we can't all reach on our own.
I only have a brief point to make. So the two questions were about staff morale, loss of staff, and the hour of training for PGC primary teachers, trainees. The brief point I have to make is potentially a little controversial, and perhaps I'm not as best informed, but others may be. The teaching and learning responsibility payments that teachers can benefit from when they take up an additional responsibility in a school. I wonder, is it time for that to be reviewed? There are scales. There are, I think, 3 scales, and the person in charge or persons in charge, senior leaders and governing body, whoever it is, can choose where they want to put people on those scales. But in my opinion, I don't think that the music teacher with a teaching and learning responsibility for making sure you have your concerts throughout the year, making sure that you get your children to the venue and you get back at 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night, and then you're back at work the next morning. I don't think they have less to do than the person leading maths in a school. I don't think they're any less valuable than the person leading maths in a school. And those scales, we want people to feel like they're valued, and we want people to feel like their work is appreciated. I don't know if it's time for a review of that. It needs to be equitable. That's the only point I would make on that.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Do we have any others? Yes, absolutely.
This one. Thank you. I think that there's a interesting reflection between the way that the Treasury sees music education and funding music and the way that children and parents also see it, in that if there isn't a concrete or obvious value at the end of it, that it doesn't get the attention it deserves. So I went to quite a deprived school in the Midlands, and a lot of the kids that went through really valued music, really enjoyed being in the choirs and orchestras and things that went through, but actually they didn't see any value in studying it any further because they didn't appreciate, or they didn't see a route to a job, frankly, And I think that the Treasury sees it, and Whitehall tends to see it in the same way as well. If I could make the point, perhaps, that if the messaging that, because everyone in this room understands the value of music, but if we tie that narrative and the value that we understand to government objectives like growth, and perhaps linking it to building in cities of culture and that kind of thing, then perhaps we might be able to make a greater inroad into the way that policy is made, and perhaps cut through a bit more to Treasury messaging, perhaps.
Thanks very much. And of course, one of the sort of the key sort of developments of the refreshed plan was this emphasis of kind of music careers and lifelong appreciation. But then there's something there, isn't there, around also the music industry itself and how that operates, and that can't be separated from the education piece, because you're thinking about giving young people sort of future opportunities and stuff, and music educators can only do so much. But you can if you're looking to point people to opportunities, but then the opportunities aren't necessarily there within wider industry, there is this point here. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on that, and this wider point around the kind of the narrative and how we can get traction with people who might not necessarily immediately think of being a kind of music in crowd, if you like. Anyone want to comment on that?
It's going to sound like a slightly facetious point, but it's really not. And it's kind of back to my point on lobbying MPs. I have an office that overlooks Whitehall, and every few days there'll be some kind of protest. So we have Steve Bray playing songs about Europe, or we have farmers descending with their tractors, or we have a group of Hasidic Jews who protest about having to serve in the Israeli army. And whenever there's a protest outside, we stop and we peer out the window and we discuss who's protesting about it. And you guys need to get like the National Youth Orchestra on Parliament Square playing music, giving photo opportunities to MPs. You need to drag MPs out there, and you need to say to them, these kids is why it's important that we have music education. Here's how music can be good for careers. Here's how music can be good for growth. You need to pin us down on it. As an industry, there is not enough engagement with MPs. I do not get lobbied by the music industry in any way, other than the Music Venues Trust, who are very switched on. But if you want change, you have to acknowledge that the people making these decisions are just normal people who may have come from backgrounds where they didn't play the saxophone or the bassoon or whatever, and they may know nothing about it. And I think as an industry, it would really help you at the moment to just think about how do we make MPs understand the importance of this issue and the kind of change they can affect if they want to.
Anna's absolutely right, and there's a great story to be told. One of my constituents, he's a brilliant viola player, and I said, "Oh, what are you up to? What you're doing?" He said, "Well, I'm playing. I'm going to be at the Air Studios, and we're going to be recording music for the latest Spider-Man video game." And I was like, "Well, I didn't know that was part of your work." I was, "Yeah, it's the majority of our work is linked to that now." So it's about understanding what musicians do in their work and the industry, and the amount that they generate for the economy. And it's not just about figures; it's actually making sure those stories are told. I remember a brilliant protest during COVID times, when I think I don't know if it was the Musicians Union who organised it, but it's when the independents had they weren't going to be paid the full amounts, and there was in Parliament Square there was social distance musicians who I think they played for, it was 9 minutes or 10 minutes to illustrate the percentage cut that they were going to get. It was an absolutely amazing protest. So actually getting creative about getting the message across would be a really good way forward. And I'll look that up to find out what it was and what it was about. But it was really, jaw-droppingly brilliant. And yeah, I think we should make sure the story is told. There's lots of ways it can be told, and it can be told really well by musicians. I do have many musicians who are very active, who do get in touch, but obviously we want that to be happening a lot more.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we have a representative here from UK Music, and they do a lot of work on advocating for the music industry and its work. And the statistics which are quoted in the report have come from the UK Music Report. And we have the MU here, who represent 35,000 or so musicians across the UK. We have a great industry, and we have the Arts Council, who are always advocating for all the art forms. And obviously we're talking about music here, but yeah, we do need to do more to advocate to MPs. And I know that on a local level, our music services and other music education organisations will be doing that where they can. One of the challenges we do have, of course, is that a number of the hub lead organisations are local authorities led, and and lobbying is a little bit more difficult if you're working within a local authority. So at every time we get to local elections or general elections, we give advice as Music Mark about how you might advocate to ministers, but we just need to be a little careful around that. Some demonstration of the proven point. Excellent.
Very quickly on
Yeah, there it is. Oh, we were texting under the chair. So here it is. So yes, advocacy is really important, and reports like this are really important for us to help do that, I think. But I take your point, Anna, that we need to do more of that.
May I make a very brief point once again? This was a great question. Thank you for raising it. Well, a suggestion more than a question. Again, as Bambos said, I am on the same page. This is all about telling good news stories. How about a national campaign to highlight great practice? That was how my consultancy started. It wasn't about me becoming a consultant. It was about amplifying the great things that people do up and down the country, people that I've had the blessing to work with, and young people that have come through pathways that I've had something to do with. That is the key, to let people know that there is a pathway, there is a future. Diraj Kainth, a former student who came back to me via email just out of the blue to tell me that he's now at Guildhall studying music after a bit of a journey through. Zosa Cole, who was the winner of the BBC Young Jazz Musician competition, not when I was still his head of music, but the foundations, those seeds were planted when I was working with him when he was 11 and 12 and 13 years old. Dino Mebrahitu, who was a charting pop star. There are many of you in this room who have stories like that. A national campaign to celebrate. Can I just very, very quickly?
And just on the flip side of that, music for music's sake, absolutely brilliant, and also 7.6 billion, can't sniff at that either, with especially with gaming music and composition. We had a school that was not going to be pursuing A-level any longer. It was our most successful A-level school for a long historical period of time, and the head teacher decided, because of value added, he's not going to run it on 5 A-level students. Most A-level music classes are 5, and it's never been much bigger than that, really. But I went in and I pointed to his head girl and head boy list, they have on the wall, the big plaque. It's like that one. They've all been involved in music, and they didn't go on to do music, but they'd gone on to have really successful careers. They'd been drawn in because their friend was a musician or whatever it was, and music was intrinsic. It was at the heart of that, and that's not to be sniffed at either.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I might, I'm afraid, due to time, take those as the kind of the closing, wrapping up remarks, unless anyone has something burning that they'd like to add. Just say it's been incredibly fruitful conversation, and obviously there's no getting away from the funding question, and that being the centerpiece, but also these wider structural challenges that also really need urgent address. We're really keen at Demos to continue this conversation, so please, for those of you in the room, do hang around for tea and coffee, and those of you online, if you want to get in touch and talk about the report, please do drop us a line. But other than that, just remains for me to say thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for our panelists for this discussion. Cheers. Thank you.